A poor boy told a millionaire, "I haven't eaten in 2 days." But what happened next left him completely speechless. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Marcus Thompson shivered from hunger beneath the awning of an abandoned building as Detroit's rain battered the only possession he had left, a family photo protected by a worn plastic envelope. His skeletal fingers clutched the envelope against his chest while watching executives exit the Detroit Business Center, their umbrellas unfurling like black flowers in the downpour. The fire that had killed his parents 3 months ago had left him on the streets, sleeping under overpasses and collecting cans to survive. Today, hunger overshadowed his pride. He needed to approach someone or he'd collapse right there. Rainwater seeped through the soles of his worn-out sneakers. The cold had settled deep in his bones, making it hard to stop trembling. He'd gone 2 days without food, not even scraps from restaurant dumpsters. The last time he'd tried, a cook had chased him away with a broom, threatening to call the police. Marcus wiped his nose with his sleeve, calculating his chances with each passing suit. Too busy, too mean-looking, too distracted. His stomach cramped with hunger, a hollow ache that had become his constant companion. Then he saw him, a tall man with salt and pepper hair stepping out of the revolving door, phone pressed against his ear, gesturing animatedly with his free hand. Unlike the others who huddled under the building's overhang waiting for cars, this man stepped directly into the rain, seemingly unbothered by the weather as he continued his conversation. Something about the man's confidence, the way others deferred to him as he passed, told Marcus this was someone important. His stomach twisted again, more painfully this time. Important people could afford to spare a few dollars. Taking a deep breath, Marcus pushed away from the wall and approached the man. His legs felt like rubber, his beige t-shirt clung to his thin frame, and his voice came out shakier than he'd intended. "I haven't eaten in 2 days," he said, immediately hating how pathetic he sounded. The man barely glanced at him, continuing his phone conversation about quarterly projections and market shares. He moved to step around Marcus, a practiced motion that spoke of frequent encounters with street beggars. "Please," Marcus tried again, his voice cracking. "Just enough for a sandwich." The man's eyes flickered down to Marcus's face, annoyed at the interruption. But then something changed in his expression. The annoyance faded, replaced by a look of confusion, then curiosity. He lowered his phone slightly. "Jim, let me call you back," he said into the device before ending the call. For a moment, the man just stared at Marcus as rain pelted them both. Marcus stared back, unsure what to make of this unexpected attention. Was the man going to help him or call security? "How long have you been on the streets?" the man asked, his tone businesslike but not unkind. Before Marcus could answer, a younger man with a tablet hurried out from the building, holding an umbrella. "Mr. Harmon, your car is waiting. The conference call with Tokyo is in 20 minutes. The younger man, an assistant, Marcus guessed, noticed him then, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Is there a problem, sir?" he asked, moving slightly between Marcus and his boss. "It's fine, Jeffrey," the man, Mr. Harmon, replied, not taking his eyes off Marcus. "Give us a minute." Jeffrey looked as if he wanted to protest but stepped back reluctantly, still watching Marcus as if he might try to pickpocket his employer. 3 months, Marcus finally answered the original question. "Since the fire." "Where are your parents?" Mr. Harmon asked. Marcus looked down at the puddle forming around his feet. "Dead." A woman walking past slowed her steps, glancing between Marcus and Mr. Harmon. Her face registered recognition when she saw the boy. "Excuse me," she said, stepping closer. "I know this child. I'm Elaine Winters from the Cornerstone Shelter." She addressed Mr. Harmon directly. "He really is alone, sir. His case came through our shelter, but he ran away before social services could find him a temporary home." Marcus tensed at the mention of social services. He'd spent exactly one night in a group home after the fire, enough to know he'd rather take his chances on the streets than be processed through the system like unwanted cargo. "I don't need a home," he said quickly, backing away. "Just food." Jeffrey stepped forward again, this time more aggressively. "Sir, we really need to go. Your schedule—" "I'm aware of my schedule, Jeffrey," Mr. Harmon cut him off, his tone sharpening. When Jeffrey reached to physically guide Marcus away, something in the boy snapped. The thought of being manhandled again, like at the group home, like when the store security caught him stealing a candy bar, triggered an instinctive reaction. Marcus twisted away violently, knocking Jeffrey's hand aside. "Don't touch me." In the sudden movement, the plastic envelope slipped from Marcus's grasp, falling into a dirty puddle at their feet. Marcus let out a cry of dismay, diving to retrieve it before the water could seep in. He knocked into Jeffrey in his desperation, sending the assistant staggering backward. "Hey!" Jeffrey shouted, regaining his balance. By now, a small crowd had gathered around them, office workers sheltering under umbrellas, watching the scene with varying degrees of concern and disapproval. Marcus ignored them all, frantically wiping water from the plastic envelope, checking to make sure the photo inside remained dry. Mr. Harmon stepped forward, his expression unreadable, as he watched Marcus protect the envelope with more concern than he'd shown for himself. The boy's clothes were soaked through, his lips tinged slightly blue from cold, but all his attention was on preserving what was in that envelope. "Enough," Mr. Harmon said firmly, silencing Jeffrey, who had begun to call for security. He knelt down to Marcus's level, despite the puddle soaking into his expensive trousers. "Come with me. Let's talk about your situation somewhere dry." Marcus clutched the envelope tighter, suspicion evident on his face. "Why?" "Because you're hungry, and I can provide food," Mr. Harmon said simply. "No strings attached." "Richard," Jeffrey protested. "The Tokyo call—" "Reschedule it," Mr. Harmon, Richard, replied, without looking at his assistant. His eyes remained fixed on Marcus. "What do you say, young man? A hot meal at least?" Marcus's stomach answered for him with an audible growl. Survival instinct warred with caution. This could be a trap, but the man didn't look like a trafficker or a creep, and they were in public with witnesses. "There's a diner just down the block," Richard continued. "We can walk there together." Elaine from the shelter nodded encouragingly. "Mr. Harmon has a good reputation in the city," she said softly to Marcus. "You'll be safe with him." After another moment of internal debate, hunger won out. Marcus gave a small nod, still clutching his precious envelope. The diner was warm and smelled of coffee and grilled onions. Marcus slid into a vinyl booth across from Richard Harmon, acutely aware of his soaked clothes dripping onto the seat. Richard didn't seem to notice or care about the puddle forming under their table. "Order whatever you want," Richard said, handing Marcus a laminated menu. Marcus scanned the options, his mouth watering at the descriptions. When the waitress came, he ordered a cheeseburger with fries and a chocolate milkshake, half expecting Richard to tell him to choose something cheaper. But the man just nodded and ordered coffee for himself. While they waited, Richard studied Marcus with an intensity that made the boy uncomfortable. To distract himself, Marcus checked his envelope again, carefully opening it to make sure the photograph inside was still intact. "Is that your family?" Richard asked, gesturing toward the envelope. Marcus hesitated before nodding. He slid the photo partially out, just enough to see the faces of his parents smiling back at him. He'd taken the picture from their apartment after the fire, sneaking past the police tape when no one was looking. It was the only thing he had left of them. "May I see it?" Richard asked suddenly. Marcus's first instinct was to refuse, to protect his most precious possession from this stranger. But something in Richard's expression, a genuine interest rather than mere politeness, made him reconsider. Very reluctantly, Marcus slid the photo across the table. Richard picked it up carefully, treating it with appropriate reverence. As his eyes focused on the image, his face underwent a remarkable transformation. First confusion, then shock, followed by disbelief. The color drained from his cheeks, and his hand trembled slightly. "This man," Richard said, his voice suddenly hoarse as he pointed to Marcus's father in the photo. "Your father, his name was Michael Thompson?" Marcus stiffened, alarmed. "How did you know that?" Richard kept staring at the photograph as if seeing a ghost. "Michael Thompson," he repeated. 6'1", graduated from Michigan Tech, had a small scar above his right eyebrow from a chemistry accident. Marcus's heart began racing. "How do you know all that? Did you know my dad?" Richard finally looked up from the photo, his eyes filled with emotion that Marcus couldn't quite interpret. "Know him?" he whispered. "Michael Thompson saved my life." The waitress arrived with Marcus's food, placing the heaping burger plate and thick milkshake in front of him. Marcus barely noticed, his attention fixed on Richard's face. "What do you mean he saved your life?" Marcus asked, food temporarily forgotten. Richard carefully returned the photograph to its protective envelope before answering. His face had transformed completely, as if he were seeing a ghost, and he murmured, "He saved my life once, and I never got to repay him." Richard Harmon stared at the photograph in his hands, memories flooding back with startling clarity. He ran his thumb gently over the image of Michael Thompson, careful not to smudge the precious photo. "Your father and I were lab partners at Michigan Tech," Richard explained, his voice distant. 15 years ago, there was an accident in the chemistry lab. A mixture became unstable, caught fire. Everyone ran for the exits, but I was trapped when a shelf fell. The flames were spreading fast. Marcus leaned forward, burger forgotten despite his hunger. "And my dad?" "Michael came back for me. Lifted the shelf like it weighed nothing. His jacket caught fire as we escaped. Left that scar over his eyebrow." Richard touched his own eyebrow reflexively. "He pulled me out just before the whole lab went up." Marcus absorbed this information, trying to reconcile this heroic image with the quiet father he remembered, the one who helped with math homework and built model rockets in their garage. "Did you guys stay friends?" Marcus asked, finally taking a bite of his burger, the hunger reasserting itself. Richard's expression clouded. "We lost touch after graduation. Different paths. I went into business and he gestured at the photo. "What did he do? After college?" "He worked for Green Tech Solutions," Marcus answered between bites. "Something with solar panels and batteries." A shrill ring interrupted them. Richard's phone vibrated across the table, Jeffrey's name flashing on screen. Richard silenced it with a quick tap, but not before Marcus noticed the time displayed. 2:45 p.m. "Your meeting," Marcus said flatly. "You should go." The phone immediately rang again. Richard hesitated, then answered. "Jeffrey, I told you to reschedule." His expression changed as he listened. "They're already there in my office?" A pause. "Tell them I'll be there in 20 minutes. Offer refreshments, the works." He hung up, conflict evident on his face. As he opened his mouth to explain, another voice interrupted. "Excuse me, gentlemen." The diner manager stood beside their table, eyes fixed suspiciously on Marcus. "I thought you looked familiar, kid. You're the one who slipped out without paying last Tuesday, took a sandwich and a soda." Marcus froze mid-bite, shrinking in his seat. The manager continued, "I've got you on camera. Was about to call the cops when I saw you walk in with Mr. Harmon here." Richard straightened, switching seamlessly into problem-solving mode. "There's clearly been a misunderstanding. How much does the boy owe you?" $7.50 for the food plus the inconvenience, the manager said, crossing his arms. "I run a business, not a charity." Richard pulled out his wallet, extracting a $100 bill. This should cover his past meal, today's food, and perhaps a little goodwill moving forward. The manager's demeanor instantly changed, the bill disappearing into his pocket. Very generous, Mr. Harmon. The boys welcome any time, when accompanied by a paying customer, of course. As the manager walked away, Marcus stared at his plate, cheeks burning with shame. You didn't have to do that, he mumbled. I could have worked it off washing dishes or something. Nonsense, Richard replied. Finish your meal while I figure this out. His phone buzzed again with messages from Jeffrey. Richard scrolled through them with increasing concern. I have a situation, he finally said. Japanese investors. $500 million on the line for a development project. He looked up at Marcus, decision forming. I can't leave you here, and I can't miss this meeting. Marcus wrapped the remaining half of his burger in a napkin, shoving it into his pocket. Just drop me anywhere. I'll be fine. Richard studied him. How would you feel about coming to my office? Just for an hour or two while I handle this meeting. Then we can figure out next steps. Marcus hesitated. What kind of next steps? I'm not sure yet, Richard admitted. But I'm not comfortable leaving Michael Thompson's son on the streets. Outside, Richard's black Audi waited at the curb, its driver standing patiently beside it. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but dark clouds threatened more to come. As they settled into the leather-back seat, Marcus ran his hand over the pristine upholstery, trying not to leave wet marks from his damp clothes. The car pulled smoothly into traffic. Why are you helping me? Marcus finally asked, breaking the silence. Richard gazed out the window, watching raindrops trace paths down the glass. Your father never asked for anything in return for saving me. Not recognition, not money, nothing. And here you are, his son, in need of help. He turned to Marcus. Sometimes the universe gives us chances to repay debts we thought were lost. Marcus absorbed this, unconvinced. In his experience, adults always wanted something. No one just helped because it was right. Michael was brilliant, Richard continued, always thinking about sustainable energy solutions, even back in college. He could have made millions with the right backing. The Harmon Enterprises headquarters loomed ahead, a gleaming tower of steel and glass reaching into the cloudy sky. Marcus felt his throat tighten as they pulled into the underground parking garage. The sleek corporate environment was intimidating after months on the streets. As they rode the executive elevator, Richard's phone buzzed constantly. By the time they reached the top floor, his expression had shifted from reminiscent to focused businessman. Jeffrey waited by the elevator doors, tablet in hand, relief turning to confusion when he spotted Marcus. The Japanese delegation has been waiting for 20 minutes, he hissed. And you brought... He gestured at Marcus, struggling for polite words. Mr. Thompson will be waiting in my office while we conduct our meeting, Richard said firmly. See that he's comfortable. Jeffrey looked ready to protest, but swallowed his objection. Conference room A is prepared. They've requested you alone for the initial discussion. Richard nodded, turning to Marcus. I shouldn't be more than an hour. Jeffrey will get you anything you need. As Richard strode away, Marcus found himself alone with the clearly displeased assistant. This way, Jeffrey said stiffly, leading him to a large corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Detroit. Marcus stood awkwardly in the center of the room, acutely aware of his damp clothes and dirty sneakers on the pristine carpet. Would you like something to drink? Jeffrey asked, professional despite his obvious disapproval. Water's fine, Marcus replied, gravitating toward the windows. From this height, he could almost see his old neighborhood in the distance. The thought sent a pang through his chest. Jeffrey returned with a bottle of water, setting it on a coaster. Mr. Harmon has $500 million riding on today's meeting, he said pointedly. Please don't touch anything. Left alone, Marcus sipped his water, studying Richard's office. Awards and business magazines lined the walls. A desk held neatly organized documents and a computer. Despite Jeffrey's warning, Marcus's curiosity drew him toward the desk. Several folders were labeled with project names. One caught his eye. Detroit Riverfront Development, Block 47 Acquisition. The tab looked worn, as if frequently accessed. Marcus hesitated, then flipped it open. Inside were property surveys, demolition permits, and architectural renderings for luxury condominiums. He flipped through the pages, stopping abruptly at a familiar street name. It was his street, his block, the very place where his parents had died. A map highlighted several properties, including his former apartment, building, all marked for demolition. The date on the demolition order was tomorrow. Marcus's hands began to shake. Richard Harmon's company was buying and destroying the last physical connection to his parents. Was that why Richard had been so interested in him? Guilt over bulldozing the site where the son of his old friend had lived? A framed photograph on the credenza caught his eye. Marcus picked it up, instantly recognizing his father, much younger, standing next to a college-aged Richard. They held a trophy between them, both grinning widely. Engineering Innovation Award 2008, read the plaque. The door opened suddenly and Marcus nearly dropped the frame. The Japanese delegation is requesting additional projections, Jeffrey announced, stopping short when he saw Marcus with the photograph. I told you not to touch anything. Richard appeared behind Jeffrey, looking tired, but saw Marcus holding the photo. I see you found an old memory, he said, approaching. Your father and I won that competition with a solar battery design, ironically similar to what we're discussing with our investors today. Marcus set down the photo carefully, anger building. Why didn't you tell me your company is demolishing my block, my home? Richard's expression shifted to confusion, then comprehension, as he spotted the open folder. You went through my files? You're tearing down where my parents died to build fancy condos, Marcus accused, pointing to the architectural renderings. Is that why you're helping me? Guilty conscience? Jeffrey stepped forward. Mr. Harmon, the delegation is waiting. Give us a minute, Richard snapped. Jeffrey retreated, closing the door. Richard approached Marcus slowly. I didn't know, he said quietly. I had no idea that was your building. The project has been in development for 2 years. We're revitalizing abandoned properties. It's not abandoned, Marcus shouted. It's where my family lived, where my dad kept his work, where... His voice broke. It's all I have left. Marcus, I swear I didn't know, Richard insisted. Block 47 has dozens of properties. I never connected it to Michael. Liar! Marcus shoved the papers off the desk in a burst of anger. He grabbed more files, throwing them to the floor. You businessmen are all the same. You don't care who gets hurt. Jeffrey burst through the door at the commotion. What's happening here? He rushed forward to restrain Marcus, who struggled wildly. Get off me, Marcus shouted, pushing back against Jeffrey. In the struggle, they knocked into the credenza. The framed photograph teetered on the edge, then crashed to the floor, glass shattering. No! Both Marcus and Richard lunged for it simultaneously. Marcus reached it first, cutting his finger on the broken glass as he snatched up the photo. A drop of blood smeared the corner as he clutched it protectively. Richard knelt beside him, not for the photo, but out of concern. You're bleeding. It's nothing, Marcus muttered, still holding the photograph. Richard gently took it from him, turning it over to assess the damage. As he did, his expression changed to bewilderment. He stared at the back of the photo, where handwriting was visible beneath the broken frame backing. What is it? Marcus asked, anger temporarily replaced by curiosity. Richard's hands trembled slightly as he read aloud. Richard, if something happens to me, take care of my son. You're the only one I trust. Michael. The date written was 3 weeks before the fire that killed the Thompsons. The office fell silent. Jeffrey stood frozen by the door. Marcus stared at the message written in his father's familiar handwriting. Richard looked up from the photo, face pale with shock. He knew, he whispered. He knew he was in danger. Through the glass walls of the office, the Japanese investors watched the scene unfold, their expressions of disapproval clear as they observed what appeared to be a street boy causing chaos in a corporate environment. A commotion in the hallway drew Richard's attention away from the shocking message on the back of the photograph. Through the glass walls of his office, he could see two women in professional attire speaking with his receptionist, who pointed toward his office with obvious reluctance. "Social services," Richard muttered, quickly pocketing the photograph. "Jeffrey, stall the Japanese delegation. Tell them I'm handling an urgent family matter." Jeffrey's eyes widened. "Family matter? Sir, with all due respect, this boy is not—" "Just do it," Richard snapped, his tone leaving no room for argument. As Jeffrey reluctantly departed, the social workers approached the office door. Richard straightened his tie and whispered to Marcus, "Let me handle this. Don't mention the streets." The women introduced themselves as representatives from Detroit Child Protective Services. The older one, Ms. Winters, spoke first, her voice clinical but not unkind. "We received a call about a minor in possible distress. The restaurant manager said he recognized the boy as someone living on the streets." Richard maintained his composure, gesturing for them to sit. "There's been a misunderstanding. Marcus is the son of an old friend who recently passed away. I've only just learned of his situation today." He carefully extracted the photograph from his pocket, showing them Michael's message on the back. "His father apparently wanted me to look after him. I had no idea until today." The younger social worker examined the photograph. "This isn't a legal guardianship document, Mr. Harmon." "I'm aware," Richard acknowledged, "but it clearly expresses the father's wishes. I'm prepared to file for emergency temporary guardianship immediately." Ms. Winters frowned, consulting her tablet. "Our records show Marcus Thompson has been flagged as a runaway from foster care placement. And there's another complication. A maternal uncle has recently come forward claiming custody rights." Marcus's head snapped up. "Uncle Carter? He doesn't care about me. I haven't seen him in years." Richard placed a calming hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Is this uncle's claim being processed?" "It's under review," Ms. Winters replied. "Standard procedure requires us to place Marcus in temporary state care while family claims are investigated." Richard's mind raced, calculating options. "I'd like to request that Marcus remain in my care during the investigation. I can provide a stable environment, and it would honor his father's wishes." The social workers exchanged glances. "That's highly irregular without established relationship history," the younger one noted. Jeffrey appeared at the door, his expression grim. "Mr. Harmon, the delegation is threatening to leave. They say it's disrespectful to keep them waiting any longer." Richard felt the pressure mounting from all sides. $500 million in investment hung in the balance, his company's future at stake. Yet across from him sat the son of the man who had saved his life, looking small and vulnerable despite his defiant expression. "Tell them 5 more minutes," Richard decided, turning back to the social workers. "Ladies, I understand your concerns, but removing Marcus now would be traumatic. Let me file for emergency temporary guardianship today. My lawyers can have the paperwork to the judge within the hour." Ms. Winters seemed to soften slightly. "You realize this would involve home inspections, background checks, and regular monitoring?" "I welcome all of it," Richard replied, without hesitation. After a tense discussion about legal requirements, the social workers reluctantly agreed to a 48-hour temporary arrangement while Richard's guardianship petition was filed and the uncle's claim investigated. They left with a stern warning that they'd be checking in frequently. Jeffrey reappeared the moment they departed. "Sir, I've managed to convince them to wait 15 more minutes, but they're extremely, displeased. This deal—" "I know what's at stake, Jeffrey. Richard interrupted, rubbing his temples. The weight of the day's revelations pressed down on him. He turned to Marcus, who had remained silent during most of the exchange. "I need to handle this meeting. Can I trust you to wait here quietly?" Marcus shrugged, still processing the mention of his uncle. "It's not like I have anywhere else to go." With a final concerned glance, Richard straightened his suit and followed Jeffrey to the conference room. The meeting was as tense as Richard had anticipated. The Japanese investors were visibly displeased by the delay, and their questions about the disruption in his office were pointed. Richard navigated the conversation with practiced diplomacy, eventually steering them back to the proposal at hand. By the time they agreed to review the final terms overnight before signing, nearly 3 hours had passed. Richard returned to his office, exhausted, to find Marcus asleep on the leather couch, curled protectively around his plastic envelope. For a moment, Richard simply watched him, struck by how young and vulnerable the boy looked in sleep. This was Michael's son. The man who had given Richard a future was now gone, his child left behind. "The delegation is gone," Jeffrey said quietly from the doorway. "They'll decide by morning." "Thank you, Jeffrey," Richard replied, not taking his eyes off Marcus. "Cancel my evening appointments and have the guest room prepared at home." Jeffrey's disapproval was evident, but remained unspoken. "Will there be anything else, sir?" "Yes. Find everything we have on the Block 47 development. I want to know exactly what's happening with the Thompson property." After Jeffrey left, Richard gently woke Marcus. The boy startled awake, momentarily disoriented before his defenses visibly snapped back into place. "Time to go," Richard said simply. The drive to Richard's home in Bloomfield Hills took nearly an hour in evening traffic. Marcus stared out the window as they left Detroit's urban landscape for increasingly affluent suburbs. When the car finally passed through wrought iron gates and up a winding driveway to a sprawling modern mansion, Marcus couldn't hide his astonishment. "You live here? Alone?" "It's just a house," Richard replied, though he saw it anew through Marcus's eyes. The excessive space for a single occupant, the manicured grounds, the obvious wealth it represented. Marcus followed Richard inside, his posture tense as if expecting to be thrown out at any moment. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, greeted them with professional courtesy, though her eyebrows rose slightly at Marcus's appearance. "Mrs. Chen, this is Marcus. He'll be staying with us for a while. Please show him to the blue guest room and see that he has everything he needs." "Of course, Mr. Harmon. Dinner will be ready in 30 minutes. Marcus hesitated, looking to Richard for confirmation. "Go with Mrs. Chen," Richard encouraged. "Get cleaned up, find some fresh clothes. We'll talk over dinner." While Marcus was led upstairs, Richard retreated to his study, pouring himself a small scotch. The day's events swirled in his mind. The shocking reunion with Michael's son, the message on the photograph, the threat to his business deal, and now the unexpected responsibility of a child in his home. He opened his laptop, researching Michigan guardianship laws and the rights of estranged relatives. Carter Thompson. He vaguely recalled Michael mentioning a brother once, something about bad investments and family loans never repaid. Why would this man suddenly appear after 3 months, claiming interest in a nephew he'd apparently never visited? Dinner was a quiet affair. Marcus, now dressed in a t-shirt and sweatpants that hung loosely on his thin frame, ate cautiously at first, then with increasing appetite. Richard tried to initiate conversation, but Marcus offered only short, guarded responses. After dinner, hoping to break through the boy's walls, Richard decided to show him something special. "There's something I think you might be interested in," he said, leading Marcus down a hallway to a locked door. When he opened it, Marcus's expression shifted from wariness to surprise. The room was a fully equipped engineering laboratory, smaller than industrial scale, but impressive nonetheless. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with circuit boards, soldering equipment, 3D printers, and various prototypes in different stages of completion. "This is my personal lab," Richard explained, "where I test new ideas outside company bureaucracy." For the first time since they'd met, Marcus's face showed genuine interest rather than suspicion. He moved cautiously into the room, eyes wide as he took in the equipment. "My dad had a workshop in our garage," Marcus said quietly. "Not as fancy as this, but he was always building things. He let me help sometimes." Richard smiled, watching as Marcus carefully examined a half-assembled drone on one of the workbenches. "What sort of things did you build together?" "Solar chargers, mostly." He was obsessed with improving battery efficiency. Marcus's voice softened with memory. He said one day, "I'd be a better engineer than him." "Would you like that? To be an engineer?" Marcus nodded, trailing his fingers over a circuit board. "It's all I've ever wanted." Richard felt something shift between them. A small opening, a tiny bridge forming. "Your father was brilliant. We were competing for the same internship in college when the lab accident happened. After he saved me, he insisted I take the position since I needed the money more than he did." "That sounds like him," Marcus said, the ghost of a smile crossing his face. "Always helping others." Their moment of connection was interrupted by Mrs. Chen, announcing a phone call from Jeffrey. Richard excused himself, leaving Marcus to explore the lab. The news from Jeffrey was concerning. The Japanese investors were wavering, requesting additional concessions after the day's unprofessional incidents. Richard authorized the changes necessary to save the deal, knowing the company couldn't afford to lose this project. When he returned to the lab, he found Marcus examining an old notebook filled with technical sketches. "Your father and I designed that together," Richard explained. "A more efficient solar battery. We never finished it." They spent the next hour going through the designs, Richard explaining concepts while Marcus surprised him with his intuitive understanding of the principles involved. For brief moments, the walls between them seemed to dissolve, replaced by shared enthusiasm for engineering problems. As the evening grew late, Richard showed Marcus to his room, a spacious guest suite with its own bathroom and a view of the garden. Marcus stood awkwardly in the center, clearly uncomfortable with the luxury. "If you need anything, my room is down the hall," Richard said. "We'll sort everything out tomorrow." Marcus nodded, still looking around the room as if it might disappear. "Why are you doing all this? Just because my dad saved you? Or because of that note?" Richard considered the question carefully. "Both, I suppose, and because it's the right thing to do." "The social worker said my uncle wants me," Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. "Uncle Carter never cared before, never even came to see me after the fire." "We'll figure it out," Richard assured him. "Try to get some sleep." Later that night, as Richard worked in his study, he heard a cry from down the hall. He found Marcus thrashing in his bed, caught in the grip of a nightmare. "No, Mom! Dad!" the boy called out, still asleep. Richard gently shook him awake. Marcus bolted upright, disoriented and frightened, before reality returned. When he realized Richard had witnessed his moment of weakness, he turned away, embarrassed. "It's okay," Richard said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I still have nightmares about the lab fire sometimes." Marcus wiped his face, trying to hide the tears. "I dream about the fire. I couldn't get to them. I heard them calling, but I couldn't." His voice broke, and Richard instinctively put an arm around the boy's thin shoulders. To his surprise, Marcus didn't pull away. "I lost contact with your father after college," Richard admitted quietly. "Different paths, different cities. I always meant to reconnect, to thank him properly. I never did. That's one of my biggest regrets." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in thoughts of what might have been. The doorbell rang, startling them both. Richard checked his watch, nearly midnight. Who would be calling at this hour? "Stay here," he told Marcus, heading downstairs. When he opened the door, he found a disheveled man with familiar features standing on his doorstep, accompanied by a sharp-dressed lawyer. The resemblance to Michael Thompson was unmistakable, though this man's face showed years of harder living. "I'm Carter Thompson," the man announced, his voice raspy. "I understand you have my nephew. I've come to take him home." The doorbell echoed through the house as Marcus crept to the top of the stairs, watching the scene unfold with growing dread. Richard stood in the doorway, blocking Carter Thompson's entrance to his home. The resemblance to Michael was striking, though Carter looked like a faded carbon copy. Same bone structure, but with bloodshot eyes and a face weathered by poor choices. "It's midnight, Mr. Thompson," Richard said firmly. "This isn't an appropriate time for this discussion." The lawyer beside Carter stepped forward with practiced smoothness. "I'm Walter Green, representing Mr. Thompson in his custody petition for his nephew, Marcus. We have reason to believe you're harboring the minor without legal authority." "I have temporary authorization from CPS," Richard countered, not moving from the doorway. "Any custody matters can be addressed through proper channels during business hours." Carter pushed past his lawyer, his breath carrying the faint smell of alcohol. "Listen, big shot, I don't care about your proper channels. That's my brother's kid up there, and I'm his only living relative. Blood matters." Richard maintained his composure despite the rising tension. "If you truly cared about Marcus, where have you been for the past 3 months while he was homeless?" "I was out of state," Carter snapped, defensive. "Just found out about Michael last week. Been trying to track the kid down ever since." From his vantage point at the top of the stairs, Marcus watched the confrontation with growing anxiety. He barely recognized his uncle, a man who had appeared at family gatherings just long enough to borrow money from his father, always with grand promises of repayment that never materialized. "Mr. Harmon," the lawyer interjected, "my client has legal standing as the boy's uncle. Your position is tenuous at best, based on an unverified note. I suggest you cooperate now to avoid complications." Richard crossed his arms. "I'm not turning a child over to anyone at midnight. If you want to discuss this properly, contact my attorney in the morning." Carter's face darkened. "You think you can use your money to steal my nephew? I know how guys like you operate." He jabbed a finger into Richard's chest. "See, I've been doing some research on you and your company. Interesting timing that you suddenly found Marcus right when you're demolishing his old neighborhood." Richard tensed at the accusation. "That's completely unrelated." "Is it?" Carter smirked. "Because I've got friends at the City Planning Commission. Would be a shame if your precious development project hit some unexpected regulatory hurdles." The threat hung in the air, its implications clear. Richard maintained his neutral expression, though his mind raced. The Block 47 development was crucial to the company's future, especially with the Japanese deal. Wavering, even minor delays could be catastrophic. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Thompson?" Richard asked quietly. "Just pointing out that family matters should stay in the family," Carter replied, feigning innocence. "You hand over my nephew, I'll make sure your project moves forward smoothly. Everyone wins." Marcus had heard enough. He descended the stairs, his face set in determination despite his oversized, borrowed clothes. "I'm not going anywhere with you," he announced, standing beside Richard. Carter's expression softened immediately, transforming into an uncle's concerned smile so transparently fake that Marcus nearly flinched. "Marcus, buddy, look at you. You've grown so much. I've been worried sick." Carter opened his arms as if expecting a hug. "Come on, we're family. I'm going to take care of you now." Marcus stepped back instinctively. "You never cared about us. You only showed up when you needed money from Dad." "That's not fair," Carter protested, his false smile slipping. "Your dad and I had our differences, but we were still brothers. Besides, I'm your legal guardian now." "Not yet, you're not," Richard intervened. "And given your approach tonight, I have serious concerns about your motives." The lawyer stepped forward again. Mr. Harmon, regardless of your concerns, family placement takes precedence in the courts, unless you can prove Mr. Thompson is unfit. He is unfit, Marcus exclaimed. He used to come over drunk. He stole Mom's jewelry once. Dad had to bail him out of jail. Carter's friendly facade vanished completely. Listen, you little brat, you don't get to decide this. He lunged forward, grabbing Marcus's arm. You're coming with me now. Richard moved instantly, breaking Carter's grip on the boy. That's enough. Get out of my house before I call the police. The confrontation escalated as Carter shoved Richard hard against the wall. You think your money makes you better than me? Makes you more family than actual blood? As the adults grappled, Marcus saw his opportunity. With the doorway momentarily clear, he bolted past Carter and his lawyer, out into the rainy night. Marcus! Richard called after him, breaking free from Carter. But Marcus was already disappearing into the darkness, rain quickly soaking through his borrowed clothes. The estate was large, with forested areas beyond the manicured lawn. Within seconds, the shadows had swallowed him. Now look what you've done, Richard shouted at Carter, pushing past him to the doorway. Carter's anger momentarily gave way to concern. The kid's going to get himself hurt out there. Richard turned to Mrs. Chen, who had appeared in the hallway, alarmed by the commotion. Call security. Have them search the grounds. Outside, the rain had intensified, turning the immaculately landscaped property into a dark maze. Richard and Carter, their hostility temporarily set aside by mutual concern, moved in different directions, calling Marcus's name. The security team arrived quickly, flashlights cutting through the darkness as they methodically searched the property. But after 20 minutes, it became clear that Marcus had managed to slip beyond the grounds. As they regrouped at the house, soaked and frustrated, Jeffrey's car pulled into the driveway. He hurried toward Richard, oblivious to the rain, his expression grave. Sir, I've been trying to reach you, Jeffrey said, glancing curiously at Carter and the lawyer. There's been a development with the Japanese investors. Richard pulled Jeffrey aside, lowering his voice. Marcus ran away. Whatever business problem we have, it can wait. Sir, it can't, Jeffrey insisted. Tanaka-san called an emergency meeting with their board. They've officially terminated negotiations. The deal is dead. The news hit Richard like a physical blow. What? Why? They cited today's unprofessional conduct and chaotic management environment. The footage of the office confrontation apparently made it to their senior leadership. Jeffrey hesitated. There's more. Without the Japanese backing, the banks are questioning our financing for Block 47. The whole project could collapse. Richard braced himself against the porch column, the twin disasters overwhelming him. His company was facing financial catastrophe, and somewhere in the rainy night, Michael's son was alone and running scared. Carter approached, having overheard parts of the conversation. Your company's in trouble, huh? Funny how problems multiply. His momentary concern for Marcus had reverted to opportunism. Maybe we could help each other out. You help smooth my custody claim. I make those regulatory problems disappear. Before Richard could respond, his phone rang. He checked the screen. Detroit Police Department. Mr. Harmon, this is Officer Brennan. We've received reports of a boy matching your description of Marcus Thompson near the Block 47 construction site downtown. A security guard spotted him trying to access the condemned building on Wilkins Street. Richard's blood ran cold. That's his old apartment building, the one scheduled for demolition tomorrow. Sir, that area is extremely dangerous, especially with tonight's weather. The structures are unstable. We've dispatched units, but I thought you should know. I'm on my way, Richard said, already moving toward his car. Carter followed him. What's happening? Where's Marcus? He's gone back to his old home, Richard explained tersely. The building that's scheduled to be demolished tomorrow morning. Understanding dawned on Carter's face. Michael's place? Why would he go there? I don't know, Richard admitted, getting into his car. But I intend to find out. To his surprise, Carter opened the passenger door and climbed in. I'm coming with you. Whatever you think of me, he's still my nephew. Richard didn't have time to argue. He sped down the driveway, leaving Jeffrey and the lawyer staring after them. As they raced toward Detroit, the rain intensified to a full-blown storm. Richard gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind cycling through worst-case scenarios. His company was on the brink of collapse, his reputation in tatters, and now Marcus, the son of the man who had saved his life, was in physical danger. Michael's place, Carter said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. He had a workshop in the basement. The kid might be looking for something there. Richard glanced at him. What kind of something? Carter shrugged. Michael was always working on inventions, energy stuff, real genius-level shit, stuff. Never made him much money, though. Because he never had investors who understood the long-term value, Richard realized aloud. Another of his failures, he could have been that investor if he'd stayed in touch with his friend. As they approached downtown Detroit, emergency lights flashed ahead. Police had established a perimeter around Block 47, their cruisers' blue and red lights reflected in the rain-slicked streets. Water was pooling in the unfinished excavation areas, turning the construction site into a hazardous mix of mud and partially demolished structures. Richard parked haphazardly and rushed toward the police line, Carter close behind. Officer Brennan met them, rain dripping from his uniform cap. The security guard spotted him entering through a basement window about 20 minutes ago, the officer explained, pointing toward a dilapidated brick building with boarded windows. We've called for backup and rescue units. That structure is condemned. The foundation was compromised by last month's excavation next door. Richard strained to see through the rain and darkness. Somewhere in that crumbling building was Marcus, alone, frightened, and in danger. Has anyone gone in after him? Richard demanded. Too dangerous in this weather, Officer Brennan replied. The structural engineer says the whole thing could come down at any minute. We're setting up spotlights and waiting for the rescue team. Richard looked at the fragile building, remembering Michael's message. Take care of my son. He hadn't been there when his friend needed him, hadn't even known Michael had died until today. He couldn't fail him again. I'm going in, Richard decided, already moving toward the police line. Sir, I can't allow that, Officer Brennan protested, stepping in front of him. As they argued, more police cars arrived, their headlights illuminating the scene. Through the rain, Richard saw demolition equipment positioned for tomorrow's scheduled work. Cranes, bulldozers, and wrecking balls waiting silently like industrial predators. The rescue team pulled up, specialists in hazardous extraction beginning to unload equipment. Too slow, Richard thought. With each passing minute, the rain weakened the structure further. Suddenly, through a gap in the boards covering a ground floor window, Richard caught a glimpse of light. A faint bobbing glow from what might be a flashlight. Marcus was in there, searching for something among the ruins of his former home. Richard watched in horror as part of the roof caved in, sending a cascade of bricks tumbling down the front of the building. The police officers pulled back, calling for everyone to retreat to a safer distance. In that moment, facing the collapsing building where Marcus was trapped, Richard made his decision. He ignored the shouts of the officers as he ducked under the police tape and sprinted toward the condemned structure, driven by a promise made to a ghost. Richard, stop! Carter yelled after him, but his voice was lost in the storm as Richard disappeared into the crumbling building. Richard's tires screeched as he swerved through Detroit's rain-soaked streets, wipers struggling against the downpour. The city lights blurred into watery streaks as he pressed the accelerator, ignoring Jeffrey's incessant calls lighting up his phone. Can't this thing go any faster? He muttered, knuckles white on the steering wheel. His mind raced with competing catastrophes, his company teetering on financial collapse, the Japanese investors walking away, $500 million evaporating overnight. Yet all he could focus on was the image of Marcus, alone in a condemned building about to be reduced to rubble. As Richard approached Block 47, emergency vehicles came into view, their lights cutting through the darkness like electric knives. Police had established a perimeter, officers in rain ponchos directing traffic away from the site. Portable floodlights illuminated the scene in harsh white light, revealing the skeletal remains of once vibrant buildings now marked for demolition. He barely bothered to park properly, leaving his luxury sedan partially on the sidewalk as he sprinted toward the police line. Rain plastered his dress shirt to his skin within seconds. "Sir, you can't go past this point," an officer shouted, holding up a hand. "My name is Richard Harmon. I'm looking for a boy who might have entered that building." He pointed to a dilapidated 4-story brick structure, its windows boarded up except where a few boards had been pried loose. "His name is Marcus Thompson." At the mention of the name, the officer's expression changed. "Mr. Harmon, I'm Officer Reynolds. We've been trying to reach you." A security guard reported seeing a young boy matching that description entering through a basement window about 30 minutes ago. A crash of thunder punctuated the officer's words, followed by a distant rumble as part of the building's facade crumbled. "We've called for structural engineers and a rescue team," Reynolds continued. "But this weather is making everything more dangerous. That building was already condemned. Excavation next door compromised the foundation weeks ago." Richard stared at the building, where Marcus's parents had lived and died, where Marcus himself had grown up. Why would he go back there now? Kids sometimes return to places they feel connected to, another officer suggested. Especially after trauma. Richard knew it was more than that. Marcus had risked everything to return here, tonight of all nights, hours before demolition would erase the last physical connection to his family. He must be searching for something specific. The rescue team arrived, specialists in high-visibility gear unloading equipment from their truck. Their leader conferred with the police, shaking his head as he assessed the building. "Too unstable," Richard overheard him saying. "We need to wait for the structural assessment before sending anyone in." "There's no time," Richard protested, stepping forward. "Demolition is scheduled for 7 a.m. If the building doesn't collapse first, your bulldozers will flatten it with him inside." The rescue leader turned to Richard, his expression grim. "I understand your concern, sir, but I'm not risking my team's lives. That structure could come down any second." As if to confirm his assessment, another section of brickwork tumbled from the upper story, splashing into the growing puddles below. The officers moved the perimeter back further, pushing spectators to a safer distance. Richard scanned the building desperately. There, a faint light flickered behind a broken first-floor window. A flashlight, perhaps from a phone. Marcus was in there searching for something while the building literally crumbled around him. Without another word, Richard ducked under the police tape and sprinted toward the building. "Hey, stop!" officers shouted behind him. But Richard was already splashing through ankle-deep water, determination overriding caution. He reached the window where he'd seen the light, peering through the broken boards. Inside was darkness, save for a dancing beam of light moving deeper into the building. Years of corporate negotiation had taught Richard to make split-second decisions. Now he applied that skill to a very different kind of risk assessment. Finding a gap between the boards, Richard squeezed through, tearing his shirt and scraping his shoulder in the process. He landed in what had once been an apartment lobby, now a wasteland of water-damaged drywall and debris. The smell of mold and rot hung heavy in the air. "Marcus!" he called, his voice echoing through the empty structure. "Marcus, it's Richard." Only the patter of rain and the ominous creaking of the building answered him. Following the direction he'd seen the light, Richard made his way toward what appeared to be a stairwell leading down. The basement. Carter had mentioned Michael's workshop in the basement. The stairwell was partially flooded, each step down submerging Richard deeper in cold water. By the time he reached the bottom, it was up to his knees, making movement slow and difficult. "Marcus," he called again, louder. This time, a faint response came from deeper in the basement. "Go away! The building's not safe!" Richard moved toward the voice, navigating through what had once been storage units. Water was seeping in through cracks in the foundation, rising steadily. Finally, he spotted a beam of light. Marcus was kneeling on a partially collapsed workbench that kept him above the rising water. The boy was frantically prying at what looked like a section of concrete flooring, using a rusted pipe as a makeshift lever. "Marcus," Richard said more softly, wading toward him. "We need to get out of here. The whole place could come down any minute." Marcus didn't look up, continuing to work at the concrete. "I can't leave yet. It's here. He told me where to find it if anything ever happened to him." "What's here? What are you looking for?" "Dad's invention, his real work." Marcus strained against the pipe. "He made me memorize where he hid it. Said it was too important to risk someone stealing it." A loud crack from above sent dust raining down on them. Part of the ceiling had given way, a reminder that time was running out. "Marcus, whatever it is, it's not worth your life." "It's everything!" Marcus shouted, finally looking up. Tears mingled with rain on his face. "It's all I have left of him, all his work. He said it could change everything, but no one would listen." Understanding dawned on Richard. Michael Thompson, brilliant but underfunded, creating something revolutionary in his basement workshop. Exactly what Richard himself might have done in another life, had Michael not saved him from the lab fire, setting him on the path to corporate success instead. Before Richard could respond, a larger section of the ceiling collapsed nearby, sending a wave through the rising water. The building was running out of time. "Let me help," Richard said, wading to Marcus's side. "Show me where it is." Together they worked at the concrete panel, Richard's larger frame providing the leverage that Marcus's determination alone couldn't manage. With a final heave, the panel shifted, revealing a small waterproof safe embedded in the floor. "The combination," Marcus said breathlessly. "It's my birthday." Richard watched as Marcus's trembling fingers dialed the numbers. The safe clicked open, revealing a metal box inside. The moment Marcus lifted the box, a horrific groan reverberated through the building. Not just creaking, but the sound of structural failure, of a building giving up its fight against gravity and elements. "We need to go. Now!" Richard grabbed Marcus with one arm, the metal box with the other, and began wading toward the stairs. The water had risen even higher, now at Richard's waist and Marcus's chest. Their progress was agonizingly slow as debris floated around them, creating obstacles in the murky water. They reached the stairwell just as another section of ceiling collapsed behind them, sending a tidal wave through the basement. Richard pushed Marcus ahead of him up the stairs, shielding the boy's body with his own. Emerging into the lobby, they found new horrors. The front entrance had collapsed entirely, blocked by fallen beams and bricks. Their only exit was the window Richard had entered through. "This way!" Richard guided Marcus across the treacherous floor, dodging falling plaster and exposed wires. At the window, Richard lifted Marcus through first, then handed him the metal box before squeezing through himself. They stumbled away from the building just as a major section of the roof caved in completely. Police and rescue workers rushed toward them as they collapsed on the ground a safe distance away. Paramedics immediately wrapped them in thermal blankets, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" Richard asked Marcus, his voice hoarse from shouting over the storm. Marcus shook his head, clutching the metal box to his chest like a lifeline. "You came for me," he said, wonder in his voice. "You could have died." "Your father saved my life once," Richard replied simply. "I couldn't fail his son." As medics attended to them, leading them toward an ambulance, Marcus finally relaxed his grip on the box. "Do you want to see what was so important?" Under the shelter of the ambulance's open doors, Marcus carefully opened the metal container. Inside were dozens of detailed technical drawings, protected in plastic sleeves, along with several small prototype components and a weatherproof notebook filled with equations and notes in Michael Thompson's precise handwriting. Richard carefully examined one of the drawings, his engineering background allowing him to grasp the significance immediately. "This isn't just an improvement on existing technology," he said quietly. "This is a complete paradigm shift in energy storage." The design outlined a revolutionary battery system that could store solar energy with unprecedented efficiency, using common materials rather than rare earth elements. If it worked as designed, it could make clean energy viable for mass adoption at a fraction of current costs. He called it the Phoenix battery, Marcus explained, his voice steadying as he spoke about his father's work. "Because it would help the world rise from the ashes of fossil fuels." He looked up at Richard. He said no one would invest in it because it would make too many wealthy people lose money. As dawn began to break through the storm clouds, Richard stared at the drawings in his hands, while emergency workers continued to secure the partially collapsed building. The demolition equipment waited silently, their scheduled destruction now redundant as nature had begun the process for them. While the rain diminished, Richard observed with amazement the technical drawings in the case saved by Marcus. This isn't just any invention. This could change everything. Richard sat on an uncomfortable plastic chair in the hospital corridor, his drenched clothes still clinging to his skin, despite the thin blanket draped over his shoulders. Fatigue pulled at him, but his mind raced too furiously for sleep. Nurses and doctors bustled past, paying little attention to the bedraggled CEO, whose company was disintegrating while he sat watching over a boy he'd only met yesterday. Through the half-open door, Richard could see Marcus asleep on the hospital bed, an IV hydrating his exhausted body. The metal box containing Michael's designs sat securely on the chair beside Richard, its contents potentially worth more than all of Block 47. "Mr. Harmon?" A doctor approached, chart in hand. "We've treated Marcus for mild hypothermia and some cuts and abrasions. Nothing serious, but we'd like to keep him overnight for observation." Richard nodded. "Of course, whatever he needs." "Are you his guardian?" the doctor asked, glancing at her notes. "Temporarily," Richard replied, the weight of responsibility settling more firmly on his shoulders. "I'm in the process of filing for formal guardianship." The doctor looked skeptical but continued. "The social worker will want to speak with you. They're on their way." Richard checked his watch. 5:47 a.m. He'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, navigating a day that had begun with a routine business meeting and somehow evolved into rescuing a child from a collapsing building. Down the corridor, he spotted two women in professional attire speaking with a nurse who pointed in his direction. The social workers from yesterday had arrived, their expressions suggesting this impromptu early morning meeting wasn't a positive development. "Mr. Harmon," Ms. Winters began without preamble, "when we authorized a temporary placement, we didn't anticipate you would immediately place Marcus in life-threatening danger." Richard straightened. "I didn't place him in danger. He ran away, and I went in to save him." The younger social worker consulted her tablet. "According to the police report, Marcus was found in a condemned building owned by your company, scheduled for demolition this morning." "A building where his parents died," Richard clarified. "He went there on his own to retrieve something important to him." Ms. Winters' expression softened marginally. "Regardless, this incident raises serious concerns about your ability to provide appropriate supervision." Before Richard could defend himself, a new voice interrupted. "Trust me, supervision has never been Harmon's strong suit." Carter Thompson approached, looking remarkably composed despite the early hour. "Always too focused on the bottom line to notice what's happening right in front of him." Richard rose to his feet. "What are you doing here, Carter?" "Checking on my nephew, of course." Carter's concern might have seemed genuine if not for the calculating look in his eyes. The hospital called me as his next of kin. Ms. Winters turned to Carter. Mr. Thompson, we're still reviewing your custody petition. The hearing isn't scheduled until next week. Carter nodded solemnly. I understand the process takes time. I just want what's best for Marcus. He glanced pointedly at Richard. Unlike some people who see him as an opportunity. Richard's patience, already stretched thin by exhaustion, snapped. That's rich coming from you. Where were you for the 3 months he was living on the streets? Gentlemen, Ms. Winters interjected firmly, this is not helping Marcus. A nurse appeared in the doorway of Marcus's room. The patient is awake and asking for Mr. Harmon. Richard moved toward the door, but Carter stepped in front of him. I'm his family. I should see him first. The social workers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension. Perhaps we should ask Marcus who he wishes to speak with, the younger one suggested diplomatically. Inside the room, Marcus sat up in bed, instantly alert when he saw the crowded doorway. His eyes darted between Richard, Carter, and the social workers, wariness replacing the vulnerability of sleep. What's going on? He asked, his voice stronger than Richard had expected. Ms. Winters stepped forward. Good morning, Marcus. We're here to discuss your situation. Marcus's gaze fixed on Carter. Why is he here? Is that any way to greet your uncle? Carter attempted a warm smile that didn't reach his eyes. I've been worried sick about you, kiddo. Marcus looked to Richard, a silent question in his expression. Richard gave a small nod, encouraging him to speak his mind. I don't want to live with him, Marcus stated firmly. He never cared about me or my parents. He only showed up when he needed money. Carter's false smile vanished. That's not true. Your father and I had our differences, but... You stole from my mom, Marcus interrupted. Dad had to change the locks. The social worker's attention sharpened at this revelation. Ms. Winters made a note on her clipboard. Mr. Thompson, were you aware that Marcus was homeless after his parents' death? Carter shifted uncomfortably. I was out of state. Business matters. I came as soon as I heard. 3 months later, Marcus muttered. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Richard's lawyer, Angela Chen, impeccably dressed, despite the early hour. Richard had texted her from the ambulance, knowing he would need legal representation. I apologize for the delay, Angela said, offering business cards to the social workers. I'm representing Mr. Harmon in this matter. As Angela conferred with the social workers in the corridor, Richard approached Marcus's bedside. How are you feeling? I'm fine, Marcus replied, though the dark circles under his eyes suggested otherwise. Did you look at the designs more? Richard nodded. I had an engineer from my company examine them while you were sleeping. He was impressed. Marcus managed a small smile. Dad said it would change everything if it worked. Your father was right, Richard confirmed. The Phoenix battery could revolutionize clean energy adoption. Outside the room, the discussion between Angela and the social workers grew heated. Carter had joined them, his voice rising as he emphasized his blood relationship to Marcus. I should be out there, Richard said reluctantly. Marcus grabbed his wrist. Don't let him take me, please. The desperation in the boy's voice struck Richard to his core. I'm doing everything I can to prevent that. In the corridor, Angela was defending Richard's guardianship application with practiced efficiency. My client has already filed for emergency temporary guardianship. The note from Michael Thompson clearly indicates his wishes. A note on a photograph hardly constitutes a legal document, Carter's lawyer countered, having arrived to join the discussion. Blood relationship takes precedence in these matters. Ms. Winters raised her hand to silence the competing arguments. Our primary concern is Marcus's well-being. Given last night's incident, we need to reconsider the temporary placement. Richard rejoined the group, determination overriding his exhaustion. Marcus went back to his old home because he needed closure. and wanted to retrieve his father's work. I went in after him because I promised Michael I would protect his son. A promise you conveniently remembered yesterday, Carter scoffed. A promise I intend to keep, Richard replied evenly. I've already taken steps to provide Marcus with stability, including enrollment in Lakeside Academy. This was a slight exaggeration. Richard had made a phone call to the prestigious private school, but hadn't completed the enrollment process. Still, the mention of the exclusive institution clearly impressed the social workers. Education is certainly a consideration, Ms. Winters acknowledged. Mr. Thompson, what schooling arrangements have you considered for Marcus? Carter faltered momentarily. He'd go to the public school in my district. It's adequate. The conversation continued, with both sides presenting arguments for custody. Angela emphasized Richard's resources and commitment, while Carter's lawyer stressed the importance of family bonds. Eventually, Ms. Winters made a provisional decision. Marcus will remain in Mr. Harmon's temporary custody until the formal hearing, she announced. However, we'll be conducting unannounced home visits and will require daily check-ins. Any further incidents will result in immediate placement in state care. Carter's face darkened with anger. This is outrageous. He's my blood. The decision stands for now, Ms. Winters replied firmly. The court will make the final determination. As Carter and his lawyer departed, making thinly veiled threats about appealing the decision, Richard returned to Marcus's room with the good news. You'll be coming home with me once the doctors release you, he explained, but we'll need to be careful. No more midnight adventures to condemned buildings. Marcus looked relieved, but still concerned. What about my uncle? He won't give up. Let me worry about Carter, Richard assured him. You focus on recovering. After Marcus had been discharged and they were driving back to Richard's home, the boy finally asked the question that had been hovering between them. What happens to my dad's invention now? Richard considered his answer carefully. That depends on what you want. Legally, as Michael's son, the intellectual property belongs to you. I want what Dad wanted, Marcus said. He always said clean energy should be for everyone, not just rich people. Richard nodded, an idea forming. A way to honor Michael's legacy while potentially saving his own company from financial ruin. I think I know how we can make that happen. Back at the mansion, while Marcus rested, Richard convened an emergency meeting with his executive team in the home office. Jeffrey looked particularly stressed, his normally immaculate appearance showing signs of a sleepless night. The Japanese have officially withdrawn, Jeffrey reported grimly. The banks are questioning our financing for Block 47 without their backing. We're looking at potential bankruptcy if we can't secure new investment within days. The other executives exchanged worried glances. Richard had built Harmon Enterprises from nothing into a powerhouse, but this crisis threatened to unravel everything. What about the other developments? Richard asked. Can we liquidate assets to cover the shortfall? Not quickly enough, the CFO replied. The market knows we're vulnerable. Valuations would be pennies on the dollar. Richard took a deep breath, then opened the metal box on his desk. Gentlemen, I believe I've found our salvation. He spread Michael Thompson's designs across the table, watching his executives' expressions shift from confusion to astonishment as they grasped the implications. This is a complete reimagining of energy storage, the head of R&D whispered, examining the technical specifications. If it works as designed, it would make our current projects obsolete. Exactly, Richard agreed. Which is why we're going to pivot. Effective immediately, Harmon Enterprises is changing direction. Jeffrey looked scandalized. Sir, we're a real estate development company. We build luxury properties, not batteries. We're an innovation company, Richard corrected. And innovation means adapting when the world changes. He locked eyes with each executive in turn. Michael Thompson created something revolutionary in his basement. His son rescued these designs from a building our company was about to demolish. If that's not the universe sending a message, I don't know what is. The meeting continued for hours, plans taking shape for a dramatic restructuring of the company. Not everyone was convinced, but Richard's vision was compelling enough to keep most of the team on board. That evening, as Richard checked on Marcus before dinner, he found the boy sitting cross-legged on his bed, examining old photographs Richard had found of himself and Michael in college. "You really were friends," Marcus observed. "Dad never mentioned you." Richard sat on the edge of the bed. "We lost touch after graduation. One of my biggest regrets." Marcus nodded, understanding beyond his years reflecting in his eyes. "Is your company really in trouble because of me?" "Not because of you," Richard corrected. "And maybe not in trouble at all if your father's invention works as designed." "It will," Marcus said with absolute confidence. "Dad tested it dozens of times. He just couldn't get anyone to listen." "Well, I'm listening now," Richard assured him. "And so is my entire company." As they headed downstairs for dinner, Richard received a call from his private investigator. He excused himself, stepping into his study to take it. "What did you find?" he asked without preamble. "Quite a bit, actually," the investigator replied. "I looked into the fire that killed the Thompsons as you requested. The official report ruled it an electrical accident, but there are inconsistencies. And Mr. Carter Thompson has an interesting financial history, including substantial gambling debts that were mysteriously paid off 1 week after the fire." Richard's blood ran cold. "Keep digging. I want everything you can find." "There's one more thing," the investigator added. "Someone else has been asking questions about the fire, a lawyer representing one of your competitors." As Richard hung up, the full implications sinking in, his phone chimed with a text from Angela. "SOS. Someone is questioning the cause of the Thompson fire and suggesting your company might have had involvement." The morning light streamed through the windows of Richard's home, illuminating a corner of the mansion that had remained unused for years. What had once been a guest bedroom was now being transformed into a functional laboratory. Workbenches lined the walls, and various electronics and testing equipment had been delivered overnight at Richard's urgent request. "This should work for now," Richard said, watching Marcus's expression as the boy took in the makeshift workshop. "I've ordered more specialized equipment, but this will get us started." Marcus walked the perimeter of the room, his fingers trailing over the surface of a workbench. His face remained carefully neutral, but his eyes betrayed his excitement. "It's almost like Dad's workshop, just cleaner," Richard suggested with a smile. "Fancier," Marcus corrected, picking up a digital multimeter that probably cost more than everything in his father's workshop combined. Richard leaned against the doorframe, observing as Marcus continued his inspection. The boy moved with a curious mix of confidence and caution, confident in his assessment of the equipment, yet cautious about fully embracing this new space as his own. Testing boundaries, Richard realized, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "I thought we could work on your father's designs together," Richard offered. "Start building a prototype of the Phoenix battery." Marcus glanced up sharply. "Really? You're not just going to have your company engineers do it?" "They'll be involved eventually," Richard acknowledged. "But this is your father's legacy. You should be part of bringing it to life." For the first time since they'd met, Marcus's smile reached his eyes. "When can we start?" "After breakfast," Richard replied, "and after we discuss your schooling arrangements." The smile dimmed slightly, but didn't disappear completely. Progress, Richard thought. Over breakfast, served by Mrs. Chen in the sunny kitchen nook, Richard outlined his plan. "I've spoken with the headmaster at Lakeside Academy. They're willing to admit you mid-semester, given the unusual circumstances." Marcus pushed his scrambled eggs around the plate. "What kind of school is it?" "It's a private academy with an excellent science and technology program," Richard explained. They have an engineering track that might interest you. Will I live there? No, it's a day school. You'd continue living here with me. Richard paused, choosing his next words carefully. That is, assuming the court approves my guardianship petition. Marcus set down his fork. And if they don't? If they make me go with my uncle? Richard met the boy's eyes directly. I will do everything in my power to prevent that from happening. After breakfast, they retreated to the new workshop, where Richard had laid out Michael's designs on a large table. They spent the morning going through the technical specifications, with Marcus surprising Richard with his understanding of the concepts involved. Dad explained everything to me, Marcus said when Richard commented on his knowledge. Said I had an engineer's mind, just like him. He was right, Richard agreed, watching as Marcus correctly identified a flaw in one of the circuit designs and suggested an improvement. As the morning wore on, a tentative trust began to build between them. Marcus tested boundaries, asking pointed questions about Richard's company, about why he'd lost touch with Michael, about the custody situation. Richard answered honestly, even when the truth wasn't flattering to see himself. Around noon, Jeffrey arrived with a stack of documents requiring Richard's immediate attention. The board is requesting an emergency meeting, Jeffrey said, his expression grave. Several members are questioning your new direction. Richard signed the necessary papers. Schedule the meeting for tomorrow. I'll be ready. Sir. Jeffrey lowered his voice, glancing toward Marcus, who was absorbed in testing a component with a multimeter. The company is hemorrhaging value. Stocks down 28% since yesterday. The Block 47 investors are threatening legal action. Let them, Richard replied with more confidence than he felt. Once they see what we're developing, they'll be begging to reinvest. Jeffrey looked unconvinced, but nodded respectfully before departing. After lunch, Richard received a call from Angela Chen, his lawyer. The guardianship hearing has been moved up, she informed him. Carter's lawyer pulled some strings. We're on the docket for next Monday. That's only 5 days away, Richard noted, pacing in his office while Marcus continued working in the lab. Is that good or bad for us? Hard to say, Angela replied. On one hand, it gives Carter less time to build his case. On the other, it gives us less time to establish your relationship with Marcus. What are our chances? Angela hesitated. Blood relations typically have an advantage in these cases, but Carter's history works against him. If we can document his neglect and questionable motives, we have a fighting chance. After ending the call, Richard returned to the lab to find Marcus staring at a photograph of Michael that Richard had placed on the workbench for inspiration. He always believed this battery could change the world, Marcus said quietly. But no one would listen. Richard placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. We're listening now, and we're going to make it happen. That evening, as Mrs. Chen prepared dinner, the doorbell rang. Richard opened the door to find the social worker, Ms. Winters, standing on his doorstep. Unannounced home visit, she explained, clipboard in hand. May I come in? Richard welcomed her, leading her through the house. She inspected Marcus's bedroom, noting with approval the personal touches that had already appeared. Books on engineering that Richard had ordered, a new set of clothes in the closet, a desk stocked with school supplies. The lab impressed her most. You've created this workspace for him? Marcus has an exceptional mind for engineering, Richard explained. His father was the same way. Ms. Winters observed Marcus as he demonstrated a small circuit he'd assembled that afternoon. Her professional demeanor softened slightly as she watched the boy's animated explanation. He seems settled, she noted, making entries on her form. That's unusual for a child who's experienced such trauma. After she departed with a tentative approval of the current arrangement, Richard and Marcus returned to the lab for one final attempt at powering a test component. Ready? Richard asked, connecting the final wire to their makeshift battery prototype. Marcus nodded, eyes fixed on the small LED that would light if the circuit worked. Richard flipped the switch, and for 2 glorious seconds, the light glowed brightly before fading out. "It worked!" Marcus exclaimed, his face radiant with triumph. "Briefly," Richard cautioned, but he was smiling too. "We'll need to refine the design, but that proves the basic concept is sound." That small success created a bridge between them, something tangible they'd accomplished together. As they cleaned up the workspace, Richard noticed Marcus stifling yawns. "Time for bed," he said. "We've got more work to do tomorrow." Richard was checking his emails one last time before turning in himself when his phone rang. The caller ID showed it was his private investigator. "I found something interesting about Carter Thompson," the investigator reported. 3 months ago, right? After the fire, he met with representatives from Genesis Tech. Richard sat up straighter. "Genesis? They're our biggest competitors in the energy sector." "Exactly. And he's met with them at least 4 times since then." "Keep digging," Richard instructed. "I want to know exactly what those meetings were about." The next morning, Richard drove Marcus to Lakeside Academy for a tour and placement assessment. The school's brick buildings and manicured grounds were intimidating, but Marcus squared his shoulders and followed the headmaster without complaint. "We'll need to assess your current academic level," the headmaster explained kindly, "given your interruption in formal education." While Marcus completed the assessment tests, Richard met with the administration to handle paperwork and tuition arrangements. When they reunited 2 hours later, the headmaster was smiling broadly. "Marcus's test scores are extraordinary," he told Richard, "particularly in mathematics and science. He's performing well above grade level in those subjects." Pride surged through Richard, an unexpected, powerful emotion that caught him off guard. "He's a remarkable young man." On the drive home, Marcus was quieter than usual, staring out the window at the passing landscapes. "Too much?" Richard asked gently. Marcus shook his head. "Just different. The kids there all looked so privileged," Richard suggested. "Clean," Marcus corrected with a hint of his usual dry humor. "And their shoes all match their belts." Richard laughed. "You don't have to wear fancy shoes if you don't want to." "The headmaster said there's a dress code," Marcus pointed out, "within which you can express your own style," Richard assured him. "We'll go shopping this weekend." At home, they discovered Carter waiting at the front gate, his car parked haphazardly on the street. "I want to talk to my nephew," he demanded as Richard rolled down his window. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking." Richard glanced at Marcus, who shrank back in his seat. "Not today, Carter." "You can't keep him from his family," Carter insisted, his voice rising. "I have rights." Richard maintained his composure. "Contact my lawyer to arrange a supervised visit. This isn't the way." As they drove past, Carter shouted after them, "Ask him why he's really helping you, Marcus. Ask about the money." Richard felt Marcus's questioning gaze but kept his eyes on the road as they continued up the driveway. Later that evening, while Marcus was showering, Richard received an alarming call from his head of security. "Someone attempted to access our servers tonight," the security chief reported. "They were specifically targeting files related to the Thompson property and the Block 47 development." "Were they successful?" Richard asked, moving to his office for privacy. "No, but they were sophisticated. This wasn't a random attack." After hanging up, Richard stood at his office window, staring out at the darkening grounds. Something larger was at play, something connected to Michael's death, Carter's sudden interest in Marcus, and now this cybersecurity breach. When Marcus appeared in the doorway in fresh pajamas, his hair still damp from the shower, Richard forced a smile. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked perceptively. "Just company business," Richard replied, not wanting to burden the boy with more concerns. How about some ice cream before bed? Over bowls of chocolate ice cream, Marcus finally asked the question that had been hovering between them all day. What did my uncle mean about money? Is there money involved in all this? Richard set down his spoon, choosing honesty over comfort. Your father's invention could be worth millions, possibly billions, if it works as designed. And legally, as his heir, that invention belongs to you. Marcus absorbed this information, his expression thoughtful. So my uncle thinks you're using me to get the battery. Probably, Richard acknowledged. What do you think? Marcus studied him for a long moment. I think if that's all you wanted, you wouldn't be teaching me how to build it myself. Richard smiled, relief and something warmer spreading through his chest. Progress indeed. That night, Richard received a call from his lawyer. Richard, something concerning has come up. Someone is questioning the cause of the Thompson fire and suggesting your company could have had some involvement. Richard woke before dawn, his mind racing with the lawyer's words from the night before. Someone was suggesting his company had been involved in the Thompson fire. The accusation was absurd. He hadn't even known Michael was living in one of the Block 47 properties. Yet the insinuation alone could be devastating, both to the guardianship case and to what remained of his company's reputation. He slipped quietly from his bedroom, not wanting to wake Marcus with his restlessness. In the kitchen, he brewed coffee and spread the morning newspaper across the counter. His stomach tightened at the headline, Harmon Enterprises stock in freefall, CEO's erratic behavior raises questions. Below the fold was a smaller article that sent a chill through him. Questions surface. About fatal fire in development zone. The piece was carefully worded to avoid direct accusations, but the implications were clear enough, suggesting the timing of the fire that killed the Thompsons was convenient for the Block 47 development. Richard was still staring at the paper when he heard footsteps. Marcus stood in the doorway, hair tousled from sleep, eyes immediately drawn to the newspaper Richard was attempting to fold away. What's wrong? The boy asked, too perceptive for Richard's liking. Nothing to worry about, Richard replied, forcing a smile. Just some business news. How did you sleep? Marcus approached the counter slowly. Is it about me? About the fire? Before Richard could answer, Marcus snatched the paper from his hands, unfolding it to see the headlines. His face paled as he scanned the article about the fire. Is this true? He demanded, voice cracking slightly. Your company wanted my parents' building? Richard took a deep breath. Harmon Enterprises has been acquiring properties in Block 47 for over 2 years. But I had no idea your family lived there. I didn't even know Michael was still in Detroit. Marcus's eyes flashed with sudden suspicion. The article says the fire was convenient for your company. Did you have something to do with it? The accusation hit Richard like a physical blow. Marcus, no. Absolutely not. I would never... But you wanted the property, Marcus pressed, backing away slightly. You needed everyone out for your development project. The fire was ruled an electrical accident, Richard said gently, and my company had nothing to do with it. I swear to you. Marcus held his gaze for a long moment, searching for truth. The tentative trust they'd built over the past days seemed to waver. Why should I believe you? Marcus finally asked. Everyone wants something from me. My uncle wants the insurance money. What do you want? I want to honor the promise I made to your father, Richard replied. Deciding complete honesty was the only path forward. And yes, I believe in the potential of the Phoenix battery. But mostly I want to help you because it's the right thing to do. Marcus seemed to absorb this, his expression torn between wanting to trust and the self-protective instincts honed by months on the streets. Their standoff was interrupted by Jeffrey's arrival. He entered the kitchen with an apologetic nod, holding a tablet displaying financial charts with alarming downward trajectories. Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the board is demanding answers. The stock has dropped another 15% in pre-market trading. Richard sighed. Tell them I'll address their concerns at the emergency meeting this afternoon. After Jeffrey departed, an uncomfortable silence filled the kitchen. Marcus still held the newspaper, his knuckles white against the newsprint. I have to go to this meeting, Richard said. Would you like to come with me, or would you prefer to stay here with Mrs. Chen? I'll come, Marcus decided, surprising Richard. I want to see what they say about the battery. 2 hours later, they sat in Richard's office at Harmon Enterprises headquarters. Through the glass walls, Richard could see board members and executives gathering in the conference room, their faces grim. Marcus sat quietly on the sofa, ostensibly reviewing technical specifications for the Phoenix battery prototype, but clearly distracted by the tension surrounding them. Richard's phone buzzed with a text from his private investigator. Found connection between Carter Thompson and Genesis Tech. Will call with details later. Before he could contemplate this new development, Angela Chen arrived, her expression serious. We need to talk, she said quietly, glancing at Marcus. Privately. Richard instructed Marcus to stay put and stepped into an adjacent meeting room with Angela. The rumors about the fire are gaining traction, she said without preamble. Carter's lawyer has filed a motion suggesting you have a conflict of interest in seeking guardianship due to potential liability in the Thompsons' deaths. Richard felt his blood pressure rising. That's absurd. The fire was an accident. Maybe, Angela conceded, but a judge might see enough potential conflict to deny your petition. We need to get ahead of this narrative. Richard returned to his office to find Marcus standing at his desk, holding a stack of papers with the Harmon Enterprises letterhead. What's this? Marcus asked, his voice unnervingly calm. A report about expediting vacancies in Block 47. Richard recognized the document, a consultant's analysis from months ago, outlining strategies for accelerating the development timeline by incentivizing residents to relocate. It contained no illegal suggestions, but some of the proposed tactics were aggressive, including buyouts, lease non-renewals, and finding code violations to pressure holdouts. That's a standard analysis for any development project, Richard explained, taking the papers gently from Marcus. We never implemented most of those suggestions. But you wanted everyone out, Marcus persisted, and then there was a fire. Convenient, right? The accusation hung in the air between them, sharp and painful. Before Richard could respond, Jeffrey appeared at the door. The board is waiting, sir. Richard hesitated, torn between defending himself to Marcus and meeting his professional obligations. We'll finish this conversation later, he promised. Please wait here. The board meeting was as contentious as Richard had anticipated. Several members openly questioned his judgment in abandoning the Block 47 development to pursue what they called a pipe dream battery technology. Others expressed concern about the public relations nightmare brewing around the Thompson fire accusations. Frankly, Richard, this guardianship pursuit looks suspicious, said Eleanor Winters, the longest-serving board member. Taking in the homeless son of a man who died in a property we were trying to acquire? The optics are terrible. This isn't about optics, Richard countered. Michael Thompson saved my life in college. His son was alone and needed help. And the technology he preserved could transform this company's future. The debate continued for nearly 2 hours, with Richard defending his vision for pivoting the company toward clean energy technology. By the meeting's end, he had managed to secure a tentative agreement to fund initial development of the Phoenix battery prototype, contingent on verification of its viability by independent engineers. Richard returned to his office, exhausted but partially victorious, only to find it empty. Marcus was gone. Panic rose in Richard's throat as he called for Jeffrey. Where's Marcus? He left about an hour ago, Jeffrey replied, concerned. Said he was going to the restroom. He never came back. Security footage showed Marcus slipping out a side entrance. Richard immediately called Mrs. Chen to check if the boy had returned home, then contacted the social worker and police when the answer was negative. As Richard was about to leave the building to search for Marcus himself, his private investigator called. "I've confirmed that Carter Thompson has been meeting with Genesis Tech executives regularly. They're particularly interested in any intellectual property Michael might have left behind." The pieces clicked into place. "They want the battery technology," Richard realized aloud. "Precisely. And there's more. I've been reviewing the fire inspector's original notes on the Thompson fire. There are inconsistencies that were never addressed in the final report." Richard's search for Marcus now took on even greater urgency. He dispatched security teams to check Carter's known addresses and likely locations where Marcus might have fled. 3 agonizing hours later, Richard received a text from an unknown number. "I'm at the library. Don't call the police." Richard drove himself to the Detroit Public Library, finding Marcus huddled in the science section, surrounded by engineering textbooks and printouts of news articles about the Block 47 development. "Everyone's looking for you," Richard said quietly, sitting down across from the boy. "The social worker, the police. You can't just disappear like that." "I needed to think," Marcus replied, pushing a printout toward Richard. It was an article from 2 years ago announcing Harmon Enterprises' acquisition of several properties in Block 47. "You were buying buildings there long before the fire." "Yes," Richard acknowledged. "It was a major development project." "So you did want my parents' building?" "The company did, yes, but we would have made a fair offer. We never resorted to—" "What you're implying." Marcus stared at him, searching for deception. "My dad was the last holdout, wasn't he? He wouldn't sell because his workshop was in the basement. That's where he kept all his research." Richard hadn't known this, but it made sense. Michael had always been stubborn about his work, unwilling to compromise his vision. "Marcus, I swear to you on everything I value, I had nothing to do with that fire. And when I found out who you were, I wasn't thinking about property or development or even the battery. I was thinking about the debt I owed your father." Something in Richard's voice must have reached Marcus, because the hardness in the boy's eyes softened slightly. "My uncle called while you were in your meeting," Marcus said suddenly. "Said I should ask you about the insurance money." Richard frowned. "What insurance money?" "Dad had a life insurance policy. Uncle Carter says you're only helping me to get control of it, along with the patent rights for the battery." "Marcus, I didn't even know about any insurance policy until this moment," Richard replied truthfully. "And as for the battery, I've already told you. Any patents would be in your name, with proceeds held in trust until you're of age." Marcus considered this, then reached into his backpack and pulled out a newspaper. Then explained this. It was that morning's paper, but a different section than Richard had seen. The headline read, "Harmon seeks control of orphans' inheritance, says estranged uncle." The article quoted Carter extensively, portraying Richard as a corporate vulture swooping in to seize control of Marcus's inheritance and potential patent rights. It mentioned the fire only obliquely, but the insinuation was clear. "This is Carter manipulating the press," Richard said, anger rising in his chest. "He's trying to poison your trust in me." "Is it working?" Marcus asked bluntly. Richard met his gaze directly. "You tell me." A long moment passed between them. Finally, Marcus gathered his books and stood up. "Let's go home," he said simply. "I'm hungry." That evening, after Marcus had gone to bed, Richard retreated to his study. The day's events had left him drained, but determined. He was scrolling through emails when his private investigator called again. "I found something significant in Michael Thompson's phone records from the weeks before the fire," the investigator reported. "Multiple calls to and from a senior executive at Genesis Tech. And here's the kicker. That same executive has been meeting regularly with Carter Thompson since Michael's death." Richard felt a chill run down his spine. "Send me everything you have." After hanging up, Richard turned toward his laptop, intending to review the files as soon as they arrived. His screensaver had timed out, revealing his email inbox. A new message had arrived while he was on the phone, sent from Marcus's new school tablet. Curious, Richard opened it. Inside was a screenshot of his company's server directory, files Marcus shouldn't have been able to access. The boy had apparently hacked into the Harmon Enterprises system from the guest Wi-Fi. While Richard processed this breach, his eyes caught on a specific folder in the screenshot. Thompson Property Acquisition, Pre-Fire Assessment. While Richard slept, Marcus accessed his computer and found emails archived from days before the fire mentioned the Thompson property. "We need that area at any cost." Richard stared at his computer screen, the harsh blue light illuminating his face in the darkened study. The email Marcus had forwarded contained a thread of messages he'd never seen before, exchanged between Jeffrey and the Block 47 development team 3 weeks before the fire. "Need to expedite acquisition of remaining properties in Section C. Thompson residence proving particularly problematic. Owner refuses all offers, citing sentimental value and home business requirements." Another email from Jeffrey was more direct. "We need that area at any cost. Board wants groundbreaking before winter. Explore all legal options for accelerating the process." Richard felt sick. There was nothing explicitly incriminating in the emails, but the language was pressuring, urgent. He hadn't been directly involved in these discussions. Acquisitions were Jeffrey's domain. But as CEO, the ultimate responsibility was his. The timestamp on Marcus's email showed he'd sent it hours ago. The boy had discovered these messages and had been sitting with this information all evening, through dinner, even as Richard had tucked him in for the night, waiting, watching, evaluating Richard's character while harboring this potential bombshell. Richard checked the time. 3:17 a.m. Too early to wake Marcus for a conversation, but too important to wait until morning. He paced his study, piecing together the emerging pattern. Carter's meetings with Genesis Tech, Michael's calls to the same company before his death. The fire's convenient timing for the Block 47 development. His private investigator had noted inconsistencies in the fire report. What if the electrical accident wasn't an accident at all? Richard's phone rang, startling him. Unknown number. "Harmon," he answered cautiously. "You should check on the boy," said a male voice he didn't recognize. Richard's heart rate spiked. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows what really happened to Michael Thompson. And if you're not careful, history has a way of repeating itself." The line went dead. Richard raced upstairs, taking the steps 2 at a time, his mind conjuring horrific possibilities. He flung open Marcus's bedroom door, fighting panic. Marcus sat bolt upright in bed, startled by the sudden intrusion. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice thick with sleep. Relief flooded Richard. "Nothing," he managed. "Just checking on you." Marcus studied him through the darkness. "You saw my email?" "Yes," Richard admitted, sitting on the edge of the bed. "How did you access those files?" In the dim light, from the hallway, Richard saw a hint of pride cross the boy's face. "Your network security isn't that great. Dad taught me some tricks." Under different circumstances, Richard might have been impressed. Now, he was just grateful Marcus was safe. "Those emails," Richard began carefully. "They look bad, I know, but I swear to you, I never authorized anything illegal or dangerous." "Then how did the fire start?" Marcus asked pointedly. "I don't know," Richard admitted, "but I intend to find out." Marcus seemed to consider this. "Someone called you just now, didn't they? That's why you came running." The boy was unnervingly perceptive. "Yes, a threat, I think." "About me?" Richard nodded. "Because of what I found in your company's files?" "Possibly. Or because of what your father knew." Dawn found them in Richard's study. Marcus curled in an armchair as Richard laid out everything he'd learned. Carter's connection to Genesis Tech, the inconsistencies in the fire report, Michael's calls to Genesis executives before his death. "I think your father had completed the Phoenix battery design before he died," Richard explained, "and I think Genesis knew about it. That's why he hid the plans in the basement," Marcus said, understanding dawning. "He told me where to find them the night before the fire. Said if anything ever happened to him, I should get the box and find you." This was new information. "He mentioned me specifically?" Marcus nodded. "He said you were the only person who would understand the battery's importance without trying to control it." Richard felt a pang of guilt. Michael had trusted him implicitly, even after years without contact. "Why would Genesis care about Dad's battery?" Marcus asked. "Because it threatens their entire business model," Richard explained. "Genesis makes billions selling proprietary energy storage systems. Your father's design uses common materials and could be manufactured at a fraction of the cost. It would democratize clean energy." A determined expression settled on Marcus's face. "Then we have to finish it. For Dad." Before Richard could respond, his phone rang. Angela Chen, his lawyer. "Carter's lawyer has filed an emergency motion," she reported without preamble. "They're claiming you've been intimidating and influencing Marcus against his uncle. There's a hearing scheduled for 2 p.m. today. That's barely 6 hours from now." "They're moving aggressively," Angela confirmed. "And Richard, they've submitted those emails about the Thompson property as evidence, suggesting a pattern of unethical behavior." The same emails Marcus had discovered. Somehow Carter had obtained them as well. After ending the call, Richard turned to find Marcus watching him intently. "My uncle is trying to take me away today, isn't he?" the boy asked quietly. Richard didn't sugarcoat it. "Yes. And he's using those emails to paint me as untrustworthy." Marcus stood up, his small frame straight and determined. "Then we need to find proof about the fire before the hearing." Richard's private investigator arrived an hour later, bringing copies of the original fire inspector's notes and photographs. They spread the materials across the dining room table, searching for anything unusual. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to a photograph of the electrical panel where the fire supposedly originated. "Dad rewired this himself last year. He was paranoid about electrical safety because of all his equipment." The investigator nodded. "The official report cites faulty wiring as the cause, but these burn patterns are inconsistent with an electrical fire origin. They suggest an accelerant." "Arson," Richard said grimly. "But never officially investigated as such," the investigator confirmed. "The report was rushed, signed off by a supervisor who's since retired." "We need to find that supervisor," Richard decided. "Already located him," the investigator replied. "Douglas Weber, living in Florida now. I spoke with him this morning. He remembers the Thompson fire because he had concerns about the investigation, but was pressured to close the case quickly." "Pressured by whom?" He wouldn't say over the phone, but he did mention that someone from the City Planning Commission called him several times during the investigation. Richard's mind raced. Carter had mentioned having friends at the Planning Commission when he'd threatened to delay the Block 47 project. "Can Weber testify today?" Richard asked. "Not in person, but he's willing to provide a sworn statement." Richard checked his watch. "Get it, now." While the investigator worked on securing Weber's statement, Richard and Marcus continued examining the evidence. The boy's engineering knowledge proved invaluable as he identified multiple inconsistencies in the technical aspects of the fire report. "Dad would never have left wires exposed like this," Marcus insisted, pointing to photographs of the supposed origin point. "And look, this junction box shows signs of tampering." Richard's phone rang again. Jeffrey, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "Sir, there's a situation at the office. The SEC has arrived with a warrant related to the Block 47 development. They're seizing files and servers." "Who authorized this investigation?" Richard demanded. Unknown, sir, but they're particularly interested in all communications regarding the Thompson property. As Richard processed this new complication, his security system alerted him to a visitor at the gate. The camera showed Carter Thompson, accompanied by his lawyer, and a woman Richard recognized from Child Protective Services. "They're early," Richard muttered, instructing security to let them in. When Carter strode into the house, his confidence was palpable. "We've come for Marcus," he announced without preamble. "The judge has granted an emergency removal order pending today's hearing." The CPS worker looked uncomfortable but confirmed. Given the allegations raised, the court feels a neutral environment would be best until the matter is resolved. Richard maintained his composure. "My lawyer is on her way. No one is taking Marcus anywhere until she arrives." Carter smirked. "Always following the rules, aren't you, Harmon? Except when it comes to acquiring property you want or stealing other people's inventions." "That's enough," Richard warned. Marcus stood beside Richard, his voice steady despite the tension. "I'm not going with you, Uncle Carter. You never cared about me before." "That's not true, kiddo," Carter said, his tone softening into something performatively paternal. "I've always looked out for you. Who do you think paid for your mom's hospital bills when you were born?" This seemed to catch Marcus off guard. "What?" "Your dad was broke back then. I covered the medical expenses." Carter stepped closer. "Family helps family, Marcus. That's something Harmon here wouldn't understand." Richard stayed silent, recognizing the manipulation for what it was, but uncertain how to counter it without seeming equally manipulative. The standoff was interrupted by the arrival of Angela Chen, arms filled with legal folders. "No one is removing Marcus without proper procedure," she announced firmly. "The emergency order requires judicial review with all parties present." While the adults argued legal technicalities, Marcus slipped away to Richard's study. Minutes later, he returned with a small recording device, one of Richard's dictaphones. "Uncle Carter," Marcus called out, interrupting the heated discussion. "You said you paid for my mom's hospital bills?" Carter turned, softening his expression again. "That's right, kiddo. Your dad could barely make rent back then." "That's funny," Marcus said, holding up the device. "Because I have Dad's journal entries from that time. He says Grandma Thompson paid those bills with her retirement fund." Carter's face darkened. "Your dad always was creative with the truth." "I don't think so," Marcus countered, pressing play on the device. Michael Thompson's voice filled the room, a recording that made Richard's heart clench with recognition. "Carter came by again today, asking about the battery design. Claims he has investors interested, but won't say who. I don't trust him after what happened with Mom's money. The design isn't ready to share anyway. The thermal regulation issue is still causing stability problems." Carter lunged for the device. "Turn that off. Those are private family matters." "Did you know about my dad's invention before he died?" Marcus demanded, backing away. "Is that why you suddenly want me now? To get the designs?" "Don't be ridiculous," Carter blustered, but his eyes had shifted, calculation replacing the performative warmth. The CPS worker was watching with increasing concern. "Mr. Thompson, these allegations are serious. If you've misrepresented your relationship with Marcus—" "I haven't misrepresented anything," Carter snapped. "The boy is confused, manipulated by Harmon." Richard's phone buzzed with a text from his investigator. "Got Weber's statement. Fire definitely arson. Commissioner Jenkins signed off despite obvious evidence. Jenkins has financial ties to Genesis Tech." Understanding crystallized in Richard's mind. He looked at Carter with new clarity. "You're working with Genesis Tech to obtain Michael's battery design. You knew its value all along." Carter's expression confirmed the accusation before he could deny it. "You don't understand what's at stake," he said, dropping the caring uncle pretense entirely. "That battery design is worth billions, and the kid can't possibly appreciate its value." My dad didn't create it for money, Marcus said fiercely. He wanted to help people, to make clean energy available to everyone. Your father was a naive idealist, Carter responded dismissively. Just like you. In the midst of this confrontation, Richard noticed Marcus examining a document from Angela's files. The boy's expression changed from confusion to shock. What is it? Richard asked. Marcus handed him the paper, a copy of his father's life insurance policy. Look who the beneficiary is. Richard scanned the document, then looked up at Carter with cold understanding. You're listed as the trustee for Marcus's benefit. You would control the money until he turns 25. Standard procedure, Carter's lawyer interjected smoothly. Perfectly legal. And perfectly convenient, Richard countered, considering you've never shown any interest in Marcus's welfare until now. The CPS worker was taking notes furiously. These allegations will need to be addressed at today's hearing. As everyone prepared to leave for the courthouse, Marcus pulled Richard aside. I found something else in those files you didn't see, he whispered. An email from someone at Genesis to my dad, threatening him the day before the fire. Richard felt a rush of both hope and dread. Show me. While discussing their discovery, Marcus revealed the final piece of evidence. On the back of our USB drive, Dad left a video message for you with the full design plans, dated the day he died. Richard and Marcus sat side by side in the courtroom, their shoulders almost touching as they waited for the judge to appear. The polished wooden benches were hard and uncomfortable, but Richard barely noticed, his mind focused entirely on the USB drive clutched in Marcus's hand. The small device, containing Michael Thompson's final message, felt impossibly heavy with potential, both as evidence and as a connection to the man who had saved Richard's life all those years ago. Angela Chen sat on Richard's other side, arranging documents meticulously. Across the aisle, Carter Thompson whispered urgently with his lawyer, occasionally shooting suspicious glances toward Marcus and the USB drive. Are you nervous? Marcus asked quietly, his voice steadier than Richard would have expected from a 12-year-old facing such high stakes. A little, Richard admitted, but the truth is on our side. Marcus nodded solemnly. Dad always said the truth matters most, even when it's inconvenient. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Eleanor Simmons entered. She was a stern-looking woman in her 60s with silver-rimmed glasses and a reputation for being thorough and fair. This is an unusual hearing, she began, reviewing the file before her. We have competing petitions for guardianship, allegations of corporate malfeasance, and insinuations about the cause of death of the minor's parents. She looked up, her gaze moving between the parties. Let me be clear. My only concern is the welfare of Marcus Thompson. All other matters are secondary. Carter's lawyer rose first, presenting their case with practiced eloquence. He emphasized Carter's blood relationship to Marcus, the importance of family connections during trauma, and cast doubt on Richard's motives. The emails about acquiring the Thompson property at any cost were entered into evidence, along with the suspicious timing of Richard's interest in Marcus coinciding with the discovery of Michael's invention. Throughout the presentation, Marcus remained still beside Richard, but his knuckles whitened around the USB drive. When Angela rose to present their case, she started with Weber's sworn statement about irregularities in the fire investigation. Your Honor, we have reason to believe the fire that killed Michael and Lisa Thompson was deliberately set, not an electrical accident as initially reported. The timing coincides with pressure Mr. Thompson was facing regarding his breakthrough battery technology. Judge Simmons frowned. This is a guardianship hearing, Ms. Chen, not a criminal investigation. The circumstances are directly relevant to the guardianship decision, Your Honor, Angela countered smoothly. The person responsible for this pressure is now seeking custody of Michael Thompson's son and control of his inheritance and intellectual property. She then presented evidence of Carter's meetings with Genesis Tech executives before and after Michael's death, his financial difficulties that mysteriously resolved after the fire, and his complete absence from Marcus's life until the discovery of the battery designs. The court should also consider the minor's wishes, Angela added. Marcus has expressed a clear preference to remain with Mr. Harmon. The judge turned her attention to Marcus. Young man, would you like to address the court? Marcus stood, still clutching the USB drive. His voice wavered slightly at first, but gained strength as he spoke. My uncle never cared about me before my parents died. He never visited, never called on my birthday. The only time I saw him was when he came to ask my dad for money. Marcus took a deep breath. Mr. Harmon has given me a home, is helping me with school, and is teaching me about engineering like my dad would have. He's not trying to control my dad's invention. He's helping me understand it and build it properly. Carter's lawyer interjected. Your Honor, the minor has clearly been influenced by Mr. Harmon, who has a financial stake in this technology. Judge Simmons raised her hand for silence. Mr. Thompson, do you wish to address the court? Carter rose, attempting to project sincerity. Your Honor, I admit I wasn't as present in Marcus's life as I should have been. Family disagreements kept me and my brother apart, something I deeply regret now. But blood is blood. I'm Marcus's only living relative, and despite what he thinks, I've always had his best interests at heart. The judge studied Carter thoughtfully. What about these allegations regarding Genesis Tech? Business meetings, Your Honor. Nothing more. Carter's smile didn't reach his eyes. I work in sales. I meet with lots of companies. And the financial windfall that coincided with your brother's death? Carter shifted uncomfortably. A lucky investment. Completely unrelated. Richard watched the exchange with growing frustration. Carter was smooth, practiced in deception. Without hard evidence linking him directly to the fire, it would be his word against their suspicions. Your Honor, Marcus spoke up unexpectedly, I have something I think you should see. All eyes turned to the boy as he held up the USB drive. My dad left a message the day before he died, for Mr. Harmon. The judge considered this, then nodded. Very well, let's see this message. As the court technician set up a laptop and projector, Carter leaned toward his lawyer, their whispered conversation urgent and concerned. Richard placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder, feeling the tension in the boy's frame. The courtroom lights dimmed slightly as Michael Thompson's face appeared on the projection screen. Richard felt his breath catch. Michael looked older than Richard remembered, with lines around his eyes and threads of gray in his dark hair, but his expression held the same earnest intensity Richard recalled from their college days. Richard, Michael began, if you're watching this, something's happened to me. I hope Marcus found you like I told him to. I've been trying to reach you for months, but my letters were returned, and the phone numbers I had for you are outdated. Richard felt a pang of guilt. He had moved several times as his company grew, changing addresses and phone numbers without ever thinking to find his old friend. I've completed the battery design we talked about in college, Michael continued. The one you said could change everything if we ever solved the thermal regulation problem. He smiled tiredly. Well, I solved it. The designs on this drive are complete and tested. It works, Richard. Michael's expression turned serious. But people know. Genesis Tech approached me 6 months ago, wanted to buy the patent. When I refused, I know what they'd do with it, bury it to protect their market. Things got complicated. My brother Carter started showing up, saying he had investors interested. Then came the threats. He held up a printed email. The camera focused enough to make out the Genesis Tech logo at the top and phrases including, reconsider your position, and consequences for your stubbornness. I don't know what's going to happen, Michael continued, But I've told Marcus where to find these plans if anything happens to me and Lisa. If you're seeing this, it means he found you." Michael's eyes seemed to look directly at Richard. "You're the only one I trust with this, Richard. The only one who would understand why this technology needs to be shared, not controlled." Michael's image leaned closer to the camera. "And Richard, if something happens to me, please look after my son. Carter will come for him. Not because he cares, but because of the insurance money and the inheritance rights to the patent. Don't let that happen. Marcus is brilliant, just like you were. He deserves a chance to become the engineer he's meant to be." The message ended, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. Richard glanced at Marcus and saw tears streaming down the boy's face. Though he remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the now blank screen where his father had been moments before. Judge Simmons was the first to speak. "This is unexpected evidence." She turned to Carter. "Mr. Thompson, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Carter's confident facade had crumbled. He conferred frantically with his lawyer, who eventually stood. "Your Honor, this video proves nothing concrete. It shows Mr. Thompson was under stress and perhaps paranoid. We request time to analyze the authenticity of this recording." "The timestamp and digital signature are verifiable," Marcus said quietly. "Dad was very careful about documentation. He taught me how to verify file authenticity." The judge considered this, then addressed the social workers present. "What is your assessment of Marcus's current placement? With Mr. Harmon?" The lead social worker stepped forward. "Our home visits indicate a stable, appropriate environment. Marcus appears to be thriving despite the circumstances. Mr. Harmon has enrolled him in school, provided proper nutrition and health care, and established a consistent routine. Psychologically, the boy shows signs of forming a healthy attachment with Mr. Harmon." Judge Simmons nodded thoughtfully. "Mr. Harmon, do you remain committed to pursuing permanent guardianship of Marcus Thompson?" Richard stood, his answer coming without hesitation. "Absolutely, Your Honor. Michael saved my life once. Caring for his son isn't just repaying a debt. It's the right thing to do." After a brief recess to consider the evidence, Judge Simmons returned with her decision. "In the matter of guardianship for Marcus Thompson, I am granting full legal guardianship to Richard Harmon." She held up her hand to silence Carter's protest. "Mr. Thompson, the evidence suggests your interest in your nephew is primarily financial. Furthermore, I am referring the allegations regarding the fire that killed Michael and Lisa Thompson to the District Attorney's Office for investigation." As the implications of this victory sank in, Richard felt Marcus's hand slip into his own, squeezing tightly. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered, alerted to the high-profile case involving the CEO of Harmon Enterprises. Richard guided Marcus through the crowd with Angela running interference. "What happens now?" Marcus asked once they were safely in Richard's car. "Now we build your father's battery," Richard replied. "And we honor his wish to make it available to everyone who needs it." 1 month later, Richard stood on a stage before a crowd of investors, journalists, and industry leaders. The Thompson-Harmon Technologies sign gleamed behind him as he prepared to unveil the Phoenix battery to the world. Marcus stood beside him, dressed in a suit that finally fit properly, his posture confident as Richard introduced him as the co-creator of the technology. The Phoenix battery represents not just a technological breakthrough, Richard explained, but a new philosophy of business. Clean energy shouldn't be a luxury. It should be accessible to everyone. As he outlined the company's plans to license the technology at minimal cost to manufacturers in developing nations while maintaining stricter terms for corporations that could afford to pay, Richard caught sight of Marcus's proud smile. The presentation concluded with thunderous applause. The Japanese investors, who had once abandoned the Block 47 project, were among the first to approach afterward, eager to partner with the reborn company. Later that evening, as they drove home to the house that now truly felt like it belonged to both of them, Marcus stared out the window thoughtfully. "Dad would be proud," he said finally. "Of you, absolutely," Richard agreed. Marcus shook his head. "Of both of us, for doing the right thing with his invention." At home, while celebrating with ice cream in the kitchen, Marcus found a series of letters dated years ago, correspondence between his father and Richard that never reached its destination due to outdated addresses. The letters revealed that Richard had tried to find Michael for years after the lab accident, wanting to thank him and offer partnership in his nascent company. Michael, in turn, had written asking for financial help to patent his invention, but never received a response. Fate had separated the friends only to reunite their legacies through Marcus.